My name is Donna Pruitt. I'm a veterinarian, small animals mostly, some exotics, and I've been practicing out of a converted house clinic in Ochapee, Florida since 2009. If you don't know Ochapee, it's a census-designated place in the middle of the Everglades. Population maybe 12 people depending on the season. The nearest Publix is 45 minutes east. The nearest anything, really. I moved there because the rent was nothing, and the wildlife cases were interesting. Water moccasin bites, gator-clipped dogs, the occasional injured osprey someone brought in wrapped in a beach towel. I liked the quiet. I liked that my nearest neighbor was 3/4 of a mile down a road that flooded every other week. In the winter of 2013, I agreed to house-sit a property about 6 miles west of my clinic, closer to the coast. The owner was a commercial fishing guide named Terrence Mull, who worked the backcountry out of Chokoloskee. He went up to Georgia every December through February to stay with his daughter, and he needed someone to keep an eye on the property during the slow season. The house sat on a small rise above a mangrove flat, cinder block construction, metal roof, screened porch, a little wooden dock where he kept his flats boat on a lift. He paid me $200 a month to sleep there and water his bromeliads. I brought my cat, a 12-year-old tabby named Gus. Terrence showed me around the afternoon before he left. The kitchen, the 2 bedrooms, the bathroom with the slow drain. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he kept a logbook on the kitchen counter. 3-ring binder, college-ruled paper. He said it was for property notes, if anything needed repair, if the cistern pump made noise, that kind of thing. Previous house-sitters had used it. He said I should write things down so he'd know what happened while he was away. I flipped through it. A few entries about a leaky window. Someone noting the dock light had burned out. Normal stuff. I set it back on the counter and forgot about it. The first week was fine. I drove to the clinic in the mornings, came back around 6, cooked dinner on Terrence's old propane stove, and read on the screened porch while the night herons made their noise out over the water. Gus settled in immediately. He was an old cat. Not much rattled him anymore. He slept on the couch. He slept on my feet. He explored every corner of the house. Every corner except one. The second bedroom, Terrence's storage room, Gus would not go near. At first I thought nothing of it. The door was usually closed, and Gus wasn't interested in closed doors the way a younger cat might be. But one evening I left it open while I was moving some of my boxes around, and Gus walked down the hallway, got about 4 feet from the doorway, and stopped. His tail went straight and fat. His ears went flat. He stared into that room for a long moment, then turned around and walked back to the living room and sat with his back to the hallway. He wouldn't face that direction for the rest of the night. I went in the room. Shelves with fishing gear, cardboard boxes, a rolled-up tarp. A window with a broken shade that let in a pale stripe of late light. It smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. Nothing was in there. I even checked under the shelving units with my phone flashlight. This was 2013. I had a first-generation iPhone 5. The flashlight app was still something you downloaded separately. Nothing. I closed the door and wrote it off as a smell Gus didn't like. But he never changed his mind about that room. Over the following weeks, every time that door was open even an inch, he'd stop in the hallway, fur raised, and turn back. I started keeping it closed just to avoid watching him do it. I started writing in Terrence's logbook around mid-December. Just habit. The pump had been cycling noisily, and there was a new crack in the window screen on the east side of the porch. I wrote those down, dated and timed the way Terrence had asked. And one night, reading back through the old entries, I noticed something I'd missed during that first flip-through. The entries went back about 4 years, mostly mundane. But scattered through them, maybe 8 or 10 entries total, were things that didn't fit the pattern. They were written in different handwriting from the maintenance notes, smaller, tighter, like someone writing carefully. And they said things like, 3:40 a.m., Sound again from the south side, like breathing through water. Did not check. And something was at the dock last night. Gus, the logbook writer's note here was actually the Riley dog, wouldn't go to the end of the dock. And the one that made me sit very still at that kitchen table. Deck 9th, 2011. It was looking through the storage room window from outside. I put a blanket over the window. I am not writing what it looked like. I read that last entry 4 or 5 times. Then I got up, went to the storage room, and looked at the window. The broken shade I'd noticed before. It wasn't a broken shade. It was the edge of a dark blanket, thumbtacked to the top of the window frame. Someone had put it there 2 years earlier, and it had just stayed. I didn't pull it down. I told myself there was a rational explanation. Someone had a bad night, let their imagination run. The Everglades at 3 a.m. will do that to a person. It's not quiet out there. It's just a different kind of noise. Frogs, herons, the sound the mangroves make when the tide pulls through them. Your brain starts stitching it into shapes. Then, the second week of January, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to Gus screaming. Not meowing, screaming. That sound cats make that you never want to hear because it means something has gone very wrong. I came out of the bed with my heart already slamming and found him in the hallway, facing the storage room door, every hair on his body rigid. The sound he was making was continuous and low and terrible. The door was closed. I had closed it myself. But there was a sound coming from the other side of it. Slow, rhythmic, like something dragging itself back and forth across the floor in there, methodical, end to end, end to end. The sound of something wet on concrete. I want to be honest about what I did because I know what it sounds like. I'm a scientist. I believe in physical explanations. And my first real thought was that an animal had gotten in. Maybe through a compromised soffit, a raccoon, or a large possum. I picked up Gus, put him in the bathroom, and closed that door. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen, a metal mag light, 4D batteries, the kind that could double as a weapon. I stood in front of the storage room door for a solid 2 minutes, listening. The dragging continued. Slow. Patient. I opened the door. The flashlight beam swept the room. Shelves, boxes, the rolled tarp, the window with the dark blanket. And there, in the center of the concrete floor, a wet trail. Back and forth, exactly the length of the room, like something had been pacing. The floor was damp, a dark smear 6 inches wide, the way you'd see if someone had dragged a soaking length of rope or a fish. That salt and rot smell hit me then. Low tide, and something older than low tide. Something that had been wet for a very long time in the wrong kind of water. The trail was fresh. I could see where it was still glistening under the flashlight beam. The room was empty. The window was still covered by the blanket. Nothing had come in or gone out. But the trail was there, and it was new, and it ended at the far wall. I turned around, closed the door, and I stood in that dark hallway with the mag light shaking in my hand, and I thought about the logbook entry. I am not writing what it looked like. I drove back to my clinic at 4 a.m. I brought Gus, I brought my laptop and my work bag, and I slept on the exam room couch until it was light. I texted Terrence the next morning. This was the era of texting, but not smartphones with good cameras. And I remember wishing I'd thought to photograph the floor before I left. I texted him and said there might be a water intrusion issue in the storage room. I'd noticed some moisture on the floor. I didn't say anything else. He texted back, "Yeah, that room does that sometimes. Don't worry about it." I went back twice to get the rest of my things. I never stayed the night again. I finished out the house sitting technically, meaning I checked on the bromeliads during the day. But I drove back to my own place every evening, 6 miles east, and I locked my door. Before I left for the last time, I opened the logbook to a blank page, and I wrote my entry. The date, the time I'd heard the sound, what I'd found on the floor. I wrote it carefully, clearly, the way the other careful entries had been written. And at the bottom I wrote, I am not going back in that room. If you find this, you don't have to either. I thought that was the end of it. I went back to my clinic, went back to my moccasin bites and my osprey cases, went back to the quiet that I liked. I didn't think about it for a long time. But every winter since, when the fishing season slows down and the water drops and the mangroves go still, I wake up some nights at 3 a.m. to nothing, no sound, no cat at the door, and I lie there in the dark, and I think about that logbook. How many people have written in it, how Terrence knew what the room did and didn't seem troubled by it, how the person who wrote, I am not writing what it looked like, was, as far as I can tell, just another house sitter who left and went back to their regular life and probably told themselves the same things I told myself. I sold the clinic in 2019, moved up to Gainesville. New practice, different cases, city noise instead of frog noise. I still keep the bedroom door closed. My name is Ruth Calloway, and in the summer of 1967, I was 23 years old, working the front desk at Harwick Insurance in Dunmore, Vermont. Small town. Population maybe 800 if you counted the farms out on Route 9. I typed claims all day, ate my lunch at my desk, and drove my 62 Valiant home along the same 4 miles of pine-lined road every evening. That was my life, and I was perfectly fine with it. The Thornfield Spa opened that June, out past the covered bridge on Caldwell Road. Old Silas Thornfield had owned that property for decades, a wide Victorian house with a bathhouse addition built onto the back, fed by a natural hot spring that supposedly ran under the whole east side of the county. The sign they hung out front was hand-painted, dark green letters on cream. Thornfield Spa and Mineral Baths. Easttier 1921. Hours by appointment. My co-worker Patrice went first. She came back on a Monday smelling faintly of sulfur and looking loose in the shoulders the way people do after a really good sleep. Said the water was 104 degrees, that the steam room had cedar benches worn smooth as driftwood, and that old Thornfield himself, a tall man with colorless eyes and very clean hands, had told her the mineral content was good for circulation and joint pain. She'd booked a second appointment before she even left the parking lot. I wasn't interested exactly. I mentioned Patrice because she stopped coming to work 11 days after her first visit. The office said she'd relocated, no forwarding address. I filed it away as one of those small-town mysteries that don't have answers, and called her apartment once, got a dead ring, and let it go. My appointment, and I want to be clear, I never made one, was confirmed by telephone on a Wednesday evening. I was in the kitchen frying an egg when the phone rang. When I picked up, there was no voice, just this sound, like water moving over smooth stones. Soft, almost musical. I said hello 3 times. The line didn't go dead exactly. It just sort of faded, the way a radio signal does when you drive into the hills. I checked the cradle twice to make sure I'd hung up properly. The next morning, there was an envelope in my mailbox, cream-colored, no stamp, no return address. Inside, a card, thick stock, that same dark green ink that read, Miss Calloway. Thursday, 4 p.m., Thornfield Spa. The mineral bath has been drawn for you. I showed it to my neighbor Agnes, who was 60-something and sensible. She turned it over twice and said it was probably a promotional mailing, and I shouldn't be dramatic about it. I told her about the phone call. She said the lines out here did strange things in summer, all that humidity. I told myself she was right. I did not go on Thursday. On Friday, I got home from work at 5:40 to find my phone already ringing. I counted the rings from the driveway. 8. 9. I unlocked the door and picked up. Same water over stone sound, but longer this time, and underneath it. And this is the part I have trouble saying out loud even now. Underneath it was something that sounded like my name. Not spoken. More like the sound of my name was already in the water. The way a smell is already in a room before you can identify it. Ruth. Just that syllable, patient as anything. I hung up, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon I kept for company, sat at my kitchen table with every light in the house on. I called the operator and asked her to trace recent calls to my number. She came back after a few minutes and told me the last call logged to my line was from my mother, 2 days prior. There had been no call at 5:40 on Friday. The line had not been used. I want you to understand how small Dunmore was. You could not go anywhere without being seen. So the next morning, when I drove out to Caldwell Road, just to look at the building from the road, just to make it real in my mind, I noticed 2 things. The parking area had tire tracks in the mud from multiple vehicles, and the front windows were dark. Not closed for the day dark. The dark of a place that has been empty for a long time. I knocked anyway, because I am stubborn, and because I told myself I would feel stupid if I drove all the way out there and didn't at least knock. The door opened before my knuckles touched it a second time. Silas Thornfield was exactly as Patrice had described. Very tall, eyes the color of old window glass, that pale gray-green that doesn't really hold light. He looked at me the way you look at someone you've been expecting, not pleasantly surprised, just confirmed. He said, "We are closed to new visitors. But you are not new, Miss Calloway." I told him I'd never been there in my life. He smiled and stepped aside and said, "The bath has been kept warm." I did not go in. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Something in my body made the decision before my mind caught up. My hand was already on the porch railing, my feet already on the steps going down. I told him there had been calls to my home that the operator said didn't happen, and a card I never asked for, and I wanted to know how he had my name and address. He looked at me for a long time, long enough that I could hear the spring peepers starting up in the ditch along the road, long enough that the light changed slightly, that golden going amber of a Vermont evening in June. He said, "The water finds the ones who need it. It has always done this. We don't choose the guests, Miss Calloway. We only maintain the temperature." I said, "Where is Patrice Dumas?" And his face did something I cannot fully describe. Not a flinch. More like a relaxation. The kind a person does when they've been holding a careful expression and finally let it drop. He said, "Patrice is at rest. I drove home in 17 minutes on roads I knew by heart, and I did not look in the rearview mirror once because something in my gut told me that was important. I packed a bag that night, drove to my mother's house in Burlington, told her the furnace at my place was acting up. I called the Dunmore Sheriff's Department from a payphone the following week. Spoke to a Deputy Hale, told him about Patrice, about the calls, about Thornfield. He listened politely. Told me Silas Thornfield had been a well-regarded businessman in the county for going on 40 years. Told me the spa had been closed since 1961 when old Silas died. I asked him to repeat that. He said, "Silas Thornfield passed in March of 1961, Miss Calloway. Heart failure. The property's been sitting empty since. There's no active business out there." I gave him Patrice's name. He said he'd look into it. I don't know if he ever did. I never went back to Dunmore. Got a job in Burlington. Married a decent man named Carl. Built a life that was deliberately loud and warm and full of people. I have told this story twice in my life before today. Once to Carl, who believed me, and once to a priest, who told me to pray and didn't say anything else. The thing I think about, when I let myself think about it, is the tire tracks. Multiple vehicles, recent, in the mud outside a building that, according to the county, had been empty for 6 years. And the thing I never told Carl or the priest is that 2 weeks after I left Dunmore, I picked up the phone at my mother's house to call a friend. And for just a second, before the dial tone came in, I heard it. Water. Moving over smooth stones. It hadn't found the right moment yet. I think it was just checking in.